I heard a great expression on the radio the other day. Is he playing 4D chess, or does he not really know what the horse is used for? And I think realistically, it's the latter. That wasn't the issue. We built machines, they were all ready to go, and I get a phone call from a chap by the name of Andy Rumble, who worked for Anthony Best Dynamics, a good friend of the company's, and he was a subcontractor on that. He said, "Richard, have you heard Dana have gone bust?" And I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "They're in Chapter 11. And I thought, holy shit. Chaos will calm down a bit. I think we're beginning to see that with the sort of slight rollback on electronic goods.
Obviously, we've been through Brexit and Covid. The last sort of 9-10 years just seems to have flown by. I'm sure it'll be the same for you.
Yes.
What's been the period of most change, and how has it changed in your perspective from then to now?
I mean, it'll probably surprise you and surprise anybody watching this, but I'm actually a big Brexit fan. Not for the reasons that you'll think that I'm some sort of rabid right-wing bloke who thinks all immigration is rubbish. Absolutely we do it. We did have an industrial sort of machine tool industry if you look back at the 50s, but it was underinvested. We had massive labor relation issues. We had strikes. We had all sorts of problems. Well, you might at the end of it think, oh, that's so shit, we won't do anything.
You recorded.
We've got that, Richard.
Yeah. Richard, April 2025, quite an interesting time in the world at the moment. What's your take on what's happening?
Yeah, Paul, fascinating times really, aren't they? I think they're very concerning. Our friend Mr. Trump is certainly throwing a few curveballs at the moment, but my feeling is that the chaos will calm down a bit. I think we're beginning to see that with the sort of slight rollback on electronic goods. So I think things will cool down a bit and calm down a bit. I hope they do, because at the moment it is a bit fraught. You've got people who are taking orders to sell to the US on a 5-6 month delivery time and suddenly confronted with 20 or 24% tariff. That's a very worrying time for machine tool builders.
But do you think all this was planned by him in advance, or do you think it was a complete pullback?
I think if I'm on, I heard a great expression on the radio the other day. Is he playing 4D chess, or does he not really know what the horse is used for? And I think, realistically, it's the latter. I've come to realize that I think there's a real possibility this is insider trading. I mean, it is so bizarre what he's doing. And if you think there's a lot of people going to make a lot of money over this, crash the stock market, get in when it's low, and then revoke your tariffs, and suddenly there's a few people who made a lot of money. So I worry that there's something very nasty about the whole thing, but I cannot see how this can prevail. It doesn't help the US longer term. There will be some sort of tariff, but the extreme that there is at the moment it's just gone way too far, I think.
Yeah, we did a podcast, our MTDCNC Uncut one, and we talked about this and how we think it will affect inflation, of course,
Absolutely.
in the US. So the general consumer's going to get nervous, and when a consumer gets nervous, a consumer stops spending. That brings an economy to a halt, doesn't it?
Yeah.
His biggest trading partners north of the border, Canada and Mexico, are the ones that he's picking on as well as others.
Yes.
So it does look like a rollback, and maybe there is an ulterior motive to it. I mean, how do you see, from a UK perspective, Keir Starmer up until this point kept quite quiet, not really said a lot. Is that a good move?
Yeah, it's a difficult one. I can understand why he's doing it. There's part of me that says you really shouldn't be kowtowing to this sort of bullying. But the pragmatic side is, I heard JD Vance saying this morning that there's a possibility that a trade deal is close. I would only say there, beware the bearer of gifts. I hope it comes off, and if it does, then everybody will say, well, Starmer did it absolutely right. I think on balance, I think he's got it about right, the right way. But, if you looked at what happened last week, Trump effectively lost control of the bond market. The bond market is what caused him to think twice about this. So Treasury bonds, US bonds were going up to 4.6%. They were raising the interest rate to get anybody to buy their debt, and they'd completely lost control of that market. And that's why he had to row back. And those sort of pressures will keep coming back. Now, I saw a post from Haas. I don't know if you saw it.
Yes, I did, yeah.
Did you see that post?
Yeah, I did, yeah.
So Haas are sitting there, 95% of their supply chain comes from China. Now, I'm not disparaging Haas, but the great thing about Haas is that you get a very decent machine at a good price. If you double that price, you've no longer got a reason to buy a Haas machine. So you can imagine Eugene Haas phoning up his Republican congressman or whoever it is and saying, this is madness. What you're doing here is madness. And those phone calls will be happening all the time.
They're the ones that maybe impact. Because, I mean, I think even in that statement, they were talking about cutting overtime,
Yep.
no new recruitment.
Yep.
You know, that then impacts on the common sort of common person, but the man that's coming into work every day
Sure.
of the week. So it's a knock-on effect. Richard, the Chinese market and the battle between them as this trade war, where do you see the end to that? Because that just seems to be escalating outside of everything that we talk about. And you did a really interesting post, which we shared as well, which actually it might be good for you to reiterate some of the points in that.
Yes, China's an interesting one. So if you look back historically at China, so under Mao, they brought in the one-child policy at the end of the 70s, and effectively that was in place till about 2005, and it was rigorously enforced. You know, you could not have more than one child. They were also industrializing at the same time. And when a country industrializes, when a nation industrializes, it's natural as people move off the farms and you no longer need cheap labor. You move into the city and cities are confined. Effectively, you have less children. So there was a natural tendency to have less children, rigorously enforced by the government, and that went on for years. So the baby boom generation, which was 46 to 64, my generation, the largest generation effectively that the world has ever known since the war, they are now all reaching retirement, on the backdrop that there was nobody being born to backfill. So I think the UN are predicting that the Chinese population will go from 1.2 billion to about 500 million or 700 million by the end of this century, 2100. That is a frightening change. So I think China has got real problems. It's got a boom in its housing industry because it's encouraged all its citizens to invest in their own country. They're not allowed to take money outside of the country. So they've built a load of apartments. I think over 1 billion have been built that nobody's living in. And so everybody puts their private money into a housing boom, and that housing boom, it's like a Ponzi scheme. Sooner or later, it will implode like it did with us in 2008, 2009. So I think China has got some very serious existential problems, and I think Trump is going to make it a lot harder for them. I think the whole British Steel thing that we've seen, China is a difficult player. You've got to be very careful. And I think they know that they're under real threat, and they will do some pretty desperate things. Xi will do some pretty desperate things to cling on to power. Because if the Chinese people in the provinces start revolting, if they haven't got jobs, then that's the end of China. And it's happened through history. Every 100 years or so, the Chinese state collapses. So it's a real existential moment for China, I think.
Very interesting. Richard, let's talk about you, which is really what this podcast is about. I like our audience to learn a little bit more about the individual, and obviously the managing director of Kingsbury. But where did it all start for you? A lot of what we try and do is dig into the history.
Yes. Yeah. Well, it started really, my grandfather started the business in 1956, which is quite late. He was born in 1907, so he was already nearly 50. And when he started the business, his two sons started with him, so my father and my uncle. So all three of them started the business at the same time. Quite an interesting story as to how it all started, which I have done this sort of a piece on before, but by the time, I think by the time I was going to school, the business had become successful. So I had the good fortune of being educated, privately. So I probably did a lot better as a result of that than I would have done if I'd gone to the States, because I'm pretty thick. And when it got to the end of the school time, I decided I didn't want to go to university. I'd already made up my mind that I'd quite like to get involved with the engineering business. I'd been listening to my father talk about it. I'd met a lot of his friends, and they seemed to be an enjoyable life. He really, I could tell, enjoyed what he did.
What was he doing then?
He was selling for Kingsbury. So effectively he had responsibility for not just the factored products, the stuff that we were selling for Index. So we'd signed with Index in 1956.
So that relationship goes all the way
almost
back.
70 years. Yeah, that's how it started.
Yeah.
So it all started with Index in 56. We also built and manufactured inline and rotary transfer machines. And this is a complicated segue, but we did that under license from a company called Kingsbury in the States, which had no familial ties with my family. But my grandfather was at an exhibition in Chicago in the 60s and saw this booth with Kingsbury on it, went on there and got on very well with the guy that ran it. And we ended up building Kingsbury products, inline and rotary transfer machines in the UK. And Dad was selling them into Europe and Australasia. So he was traveling the world. He was selling these machines. He was involved with Index. I started an apprenticeship with a UK company. I won't mention its name. And I was spending 9 months filling oil into cam autos and grinding drills, thinking, what a waste of my time this is. So I spoke to the old man. I said, Dad, if this is engineering, to be honest, you can stuff it. And he said, well, how about working at Index in Germany? And I thought, yeah, okay, I don't speak any German, but I'll give it a go. So I was offered an apprenticeship at Index. So I went there in 1983. I was 19, just before my 20th birthday. So I was late on the apprentice scene, really. But I did 3 years there and absolutely loved it. By the end of it, I was sort of in the applications department, and Index coincidentally was setting up a new daughter company in the States. I think it had about 7 employees, all Germans, under a guy called Gary Seeler, lovely chap. And they offered me a job and said, look, rather than going back to the UK now, how about work in the States for a couple of years? You speak English, obviously you speak German now. It would be quite handy for us. So I went to the States in 85, and I stayed there till 88.
Okay, and then you came back to Kingsbury as the managing director.
No. I came back with the mandate from my uncle, just get stuck in, boy, which is not very helpful. But yeah, so I came back in. I just sort of got involved with anything that I could get involved with, a bit of applications work, selling. I got into sales. I learnt by mistakes. I think for the first 2 or 3 years, I didn't sell a thing. Not a thing. I thought, God, this is much more difficult. And I started thinking about it. And I actually became MD in 93. So it wasn't that much longer later. So I became MD in 93, and yeah, been in that position ever since.
So as the MD now, what is the main role? You love the sales aspect. We've spoken about that off camera, and I'm sure we'll touch on that a bit more shortly, because that's really, really integral to any company. But you've got quite a few strong beliefs in how Kingsbury approach the process compared to others.
Yes.
Is that a big part of your day-to-day activity these days?
It is, actually. So I've just taken on effectively the sales director role. So I'm although I'm MD, I decided I really wanted to change the way we were selling, and I thought I'd better put my name on the top of the ticket. So I've now become responsible for our sales direction and how we sell. But I also have an equally important relationship in managing my relationship with the principals. When you're a distributor like we are, you're as good as that relationship. Yeah. If Index or Hermes or whatever decided they wanted to do something different, set up their own daughter company, give it to somebody else, then my business is gone. So managing that relationship with that principal is a key part of what I do. Showing them that we have got their best interests in heart. We're working hard on their behalf. That is as important as my sort of face-to-face work with the customer.
And when you became managing director, how difficult was that? With it being a family business, and there would have been a lot of other employees within the company, for you to move into that role, were there any challenges at that point that you would look back on and think, oh, that was different to what I thought?
I mean, there were challenges in terms of the business. There were always challenges. We had lots of difficult times, redundancy programs, all sorts of things that were tricky to manage and navigate our way through. I never had an issue with nepotism and all that. People thinking, well, he's just got the job because he's the boss's son. I think they all knew that I knew what I was doing, having spent 5 years at Index. I spoke reasonably fluent German, so I was seen as a useful guy to have around. I traveled the world a lot on selling. When we were building test rigs, I sold them into China, India, USA, Brazil, Mexico, Poland. So I never had an issue with the assumption of the role, but there were certainly many, many challenges over the last 40 years that.
And if you go back to the 90s to now, what are some of those? If you look at the stock market, they always talk about the eight times that it's crashed. From a company perspective, from you personally, what have been those challenges on that journey? I mean, some of them will be obvious ones, but markets, business is never good all the time, is it? And that's the hard part, but the fun part about it.
I mean, one that comes to mind was I suppose the 2008-2009 crash. Although we'd had lots of issues in the 89-90 when interest rates were up at 14-15% and the world was tricky. 2008-2009, we had built 3 test stands for Dana Corporation. These were going to go to the States. It was well north of $3 million. We had built the machines, and in those days, the automotive world was very tough. So you were building a machine a new design machine. You were developing it from scratch. You were doing 2,000 hours of engineering before you started anything. And in that situation, we were getting paid 90% on delivery to their factory. No down payment, nothing. This is the Lopez school really screw your supplier.
So had you spent more on the development than?
No, it wasn't that. That wasn't the issue. We built machines. They were all ready to go. And I get a phone call from a chap by the name of Andy Rumble, who worked for Anthony Best Dynamics, a good friend of the company's. And he was a subcontractor on that. He said, Richard, have you heard Dana have gone bust? And I said, what do you mean? He said, they're in Chapter 11. And I thought, holy shit. We've got not a penny. We built these machines.
Were they complete built?
They were complete built. We're just before the factory acceptance test. So we affected, and luckily, because if we'd had the factory acceptance test 2 weeks before and they were in transit and we'd raised the invoice for 90%, then it would have been pre-petition and we'd have got about 10 cents in the dollar back. The luck would have it, I heard about this before the factory acceptance test. So I hoped that Dana would work their way through Chapter 11 and would still need the machines. And that actually transpired, but it took a long time. And we ended up having the money put in escrow accounts in the States. I had lawyers involved. And you know how much it cost from a lawyer perspective when you still get a bloody Christmas card from the lawyer who worked on it back in 2008.
Could you have done anything else with this machine?
They were bespoke for Dana. This was to test a particular axle. And we were developing a technique called torque fluctuation measurement, which is a very... I'm not bright enough to explain it all. The guy that developed it is a chap by the name of Bill Coleman, who's now retired, a wonderful guy, technical director. And we were looking at the way gears mesh. And as they mesh, the better the gear, the less fluctuation there is in the torque. So if you're putting a certain amount of torque in through a ratio, you're expecting to see a certain amount of torque come out the other side. If those gears are vibrating as they go together in a microscopic fashion, you see the fluctuation in the torque and it tells you the quality of the gear. So we were doing a very quick test, 20, 30 seconds, and we could say, that's a good axle or that's a bad axle. So this is a very, very specific thing. But we sat there in the boardroom, we got through it. We managed to get the money, we installed the machines and all the rest of it. We sat there as a family and thought, Jesus, we're taking bets now that we really shouldn't be. The automotive world has become very, very difficult. 90% on delivery, that was pretty much the standard. You were hung out to dry to once they got the product, they'd hang you out to dry as to when they paid you. So we decided as a company to close that part of our business, which I was upset about, having worked hard on it for a long time, but it was the right thing to do. But I decided I'd try and sell it. That was difficult in 2009. And I sold it for $1. I kept all the guys' jobs. So they were transferred across the company, bought it, a company called Berkey Porter, an American company. But I also did a deal with them, which I won't go into the nitty-gritty of, but they paid me a commission for 7 years on everything they sold. And they did $100 million in 7 years.
Really?
So we did all right in the end.
Wow, what a decision.
So it was an interesting time.
Yeah.
That was, if you'd asked me at the beginning of 2008 what my plans were for that year, it would never have been close test rigs and get out of it.
Would you say nothing surprises you these days and stuff like that when it comes to business?
Yeah, and I think honestly...
and that comes through...
I see nothing surprising me. I am shocked by what's going on. I think what Trump is doing at the moment is shocking. And if I felt that he really did understand 4D chess and he wasn't really confused about the role of the horsey, then I would be a bit more reassured about it, but I really don't think he does. And he's surrounded himself with sycophants who really don't know what they're doing. So that is a real surprise that the most powerful country in the world could be behaving in the way that it is.
Yeah, and what was the roadmap after that though? So then you're sitting down, right? Okay, where do we go now? Do we focus on different industries, different?
Yes,
that would be the plan.
Yeah, so we having lost test rigs, and we'd always been in the what I call a factored business, buying machines from Index and reselling them. We'd signed fortuitously with Hermley in 2003. So we really got into milling in 2003. So I'd flown over to Hermley. I knew that their incumbent supplier was changing. I knew that they weren't going to be too happy with that change. So I whizzed over there and that was the benefit of, I hate speaking German. I could talk to the managing director in his language about what we could do for them. And they gave me Hermley in 2003, which was a fantastic thing for us, an absolute change for us to get into milling the way we did. And then when test rigs went in 2008, 2009, I thought, okay, well, we need to now build the product range. So we got into large machining. And this took time. We signed another product. And over time, we built the portfolio. We got into grinding with Adelbert Haas in 2017, which was a fantastic move. They're very, very well respected in the medical sector. So any femoral stem or hip joint that any of your family have got, the likelihood is that they were ground on a Haas machine. We've latterly got into 3D printing, and we've opened businesses in the Middle East. So we've always been working hard to think about how to keep things moving forward.
What has changed in this industry from your perspective in, let's say, that what would be, I guess, almost 30 or over 30 years since
Yes,
took up the role? And,
yeah.
and what's the transition of changes? I guess what I'm saying from that is obviously we've been through Brexit and COVID. The last sort of 9-10 years just seems to have flown by, and I'm sure it'd be the same for you.
Yes.
What's been the period of most change, and how has it changed in your perspective from then to now?
I mean, obviously Brexit was a tricky time. They were devalued to become more competitive in the market. That was taken away from them. Then you have a situation where your interest rates are controlled by a central bank, and the central bank is hugely influenced by what the northern countries want to do, Germany, France in particular. It's been a tremendous benefit for Germany. It's kept the euro rates low compared to what the Deutschmark would have been. It's made them super competitive. And you can imagine why Germany has been a great fan of it. Germany has now got some real problems of their own. They have a massive baby boom generation. They are all looking at retirement. So they've got less people coming in behind. They've now got Alternative for Deutschland, AfD, putting them under real pressure in terms of immigration. So they're trying to stop and shore that up. So when Germany says, we're not going to put up with this anymore, we're not going to pay for Greek bureaucrats to retire at 55, and we're not going to put this money in anymore, then you start to see it fraying. And I can see it deteriorating. I think it's very difficult to keep it all together. And I always felt that if we could row our own boat as a country and try and do trade deals with India and Australia and the US and Canada or whoever it might be, and find a way of letting this bad feeling about Brexit diminish, and it's going to take time, but I think we will do a deal with the EU. It makes sense to do a deal with the EU for everybody. They just don't want to do it too quickly because they don't want to encourage anybody else to go down the same route, and I understand that. So ultimately, by the time my grandchildren are in the workplace, 30 years from now, hopefully, or whatever it might be, because I haven't got any yet, I think the world will look differently on Brexit. I think people will look back and say, actually, that wasn't a bad thing. But if you talk to the rest of my family in the business, they all still think I'm nuts. That I wanted it.
Very interesting, because I mean, if you then take the UK as a manufacturing base, we always talk about a minister for manufacturing. We don't do enough making of our own product. You look at Germany as a machine tool manufacturer. You look at us here. What have we got in comparison? Very little. You look at all the industries, the wind and energy, where all of those are made that are in the North Sea. We talk about Brexit as one thing, but surely we've got to get some things right here as well at the same time.
Absolutely we do. And absolutely we do. We did have an industrial sort of machine tool industry if you look back at the 50s, but it was underinvested. We had massive labor relation issues. We had strikes. We had all sorts of problems. And that's not uncommon in an industrial world that industrialized before everybody else. We were the first to industrialize. So our cycle is ahead of everybody else's. Germany is going the same route now. It's got the second most expensive power in Europe. It's struggling to recruit people. One of the companies that I work with, I won't mention its name, is 2,000 employees. 25% of those employees are going to retire in the next 2 or 3 years. Quarter of the company will go. And those are the gray-haired guys at the top of the business who know which way is up. That's difficult to replace. So I think Germany has got its own problems coming. Where we could do something differently is, I did a video on this, which you guys very kindly pushed out as well, on small modular reactors. You've got this fantastic company in Rolls-Royce, one of our leading engineering companies, known throughout the world, who've been tasked with the responsibility of propelling our nuclear subs around the planet for the last 30, 40 years, who have come up with an idea on small modular reactors that they have been talking about, I know, for at least 10 years. And the Conservative government decided that they're going to put them into a competition to see who should build this SMR against 7 other people. And now the Labour government have done the same thing. They put I think I used the phrase, they're given a defibrillator to the still and dormant heart of British nuclear fuels and rebranded it Great British Nuclear. It's just a bloody quango with the responsibility of deciding who should get this contract. And in so doing, they've had to persuade the other protagonists that they have a chance of winning. Otherwise, they wouldn't be doing it because it costs such a lot of money.
And who are the other protagonists?
Well, I think they're going to go down to the last two, I think, this month, and it will end up, I think, at Rolls-Royce, which it was always going to do, and GE Hitachi. Now, that probably means they'll end up saying, well, we'll give half to one and half to the other. What we should be doing is saying, let's create an SMR ecosystem in the UK, a supply chain in the UK that makes it the best SMR system available in the world, and then export it around the planet. Don't give half of it to a foreign company. You wouldn't see this being done in Germany or France. We should be getting behind Rolls-Royce and saying, let's make this happen.
But they'll say it's difficult for them because they're under restriction. They don't get.
Why are they under restriction?
Well, they might say that the government don't support it in the way other governments do. So they might ship product out to China and various other countries to be made because it ends up being cheaper.
But that's all within our ken, isn't it? We can control that. So we can say to Rolls-Royce, we're prepared to give you a big ticket on this, but
you must.
You have to develop the supply chain here in the UK. We have to be sensible about costings, all of those sorts of things. You'd have to put the procedures in place. And they would do it anywhere else in the world. You know,
and they do. And I mean, an example of that, one of the other things from your perspective, you talk about the Middle East when you set up Kingsbury over there. This is quite an interesting story, and I'd like you to tell me about it. Why did you go about that? And that has kind of, I guess, a similar message to what we're talking about here, but over in the Middle East.
The Middle East is an interesting one. Going back to the analogy of, I didn't sit there on New Year's Eve thinking, what am I going to do next year? Let's open a business in the Middle East. Obviously, it didn't happen that way. We were approached by Hermley because there was a possibility of Rolls-Royce doing an offset deal with Mubadala, which is a large sort of company owned, I think, by the state of the United Arab Emirates. And part of that offset deal was that they would assemble Trent 900, Trent 1000 engines for the A380 fleet. And part of that work had to be done in country. So they wanted to get the benefit of employing local people to build these things. Now, that deal never came off. But at the time, we had a very strong relationship with Rolls. We still have a very strong relationship with Rolls. And we had worked with them on a project. And Hermley felt that we would be the best placed to support that initiative in the Gulf and approached me on it. And I thought, well, rather than just support that one particular contract, they had no representation in the Middle East. So we asked for consideration to be given the GCC, which is the Gulf Cooperation Council, which is Bahrain, Kuwait, Qatar, Oman, UAE, and Saudi Arabia. And after a lot of debate, and we weren't the only people who wanted it, there were other fractions within Hermley who wanted it. So after a bit of debate, the board signed off on it, Hermley, and they gave us that contract. That was in 2018. We then had to set up bank accounts, which is not easy to do out there, get trading licenses, employ the right people. And we did that, and it's been a tough ride. We did that a year. I think we got trading in 2019, and we got COVID in 2021, 22. So we really struggled to get it into black figures. We were loss-making for the first few years. Then we are hit by the Ukraine war. And with the Ukraine war, everybody knows that machine tools, CNC, sophisticated machine tools, was very much high on the list from a Russian acquisition perspective. And so everything that was sold into the UAE, which was known as having a lot of Russian people using it as a filter, anything that went into that market had to go through the notorious BAFA approval process, which is the German state approval process. And it just dried up. It just stopped. Nothing was being done. So we sold machines that were cancelled. We sold machines where we never got the permission. So we've been hit by a lot of headwinds, but we stuck with it. In 2024, we made a profit, which I'm very pleased about. We sold 7 Hermley machines, and I think 2025 bodes well. But it would have been very easy to say after a couple of years, sold this for goodness.
And isn't that the biggest thing in business is about anybody that sets up a company? I always say to people that we work with, we'll make a lot of mistakes. We'll make a lot of bad decisions. But as long as we make a few good ones along the way, and they outweigh the bad ones, we're all right. But you're never going to sustain a company without having those challenging times.
Yes.
And that would be one of many, I guess, you've been through in your career.
Yes, but it wasn't a massive challenge because the overhead was a small one. There was lots of effort involved in doing it. I mean, we are in a fortunate position now in that Renishaw have been toying with the idea of setting somewhere up in the UAE, and they approached me and we talked about it and all the rest of it. And they've now done it. They're setting up a facility in the UAE, and they've asked us whether we want to become their tenants. So we've said, actually, yes, we'd love to. So we are now part of Renishaw's new facility in Jebel Ali in the free zone. That facility is being built, fantastic facility, and we're giving them permanent machines to go inside their showroom. And we've got one half of the office, or we've got a third of the offices, and they've got the rest of it. But it's a Renishaw Kingsbury building. Well, that's a great platform to work from in the UAE, and I'm very pleased about that. We're delighted to be working with Renishaw in that way. 2 British companies set up there.
What's going to be the main market there, though? I mean, it would sound maybe an obvious one, but oil and gas, or
oil and gas probably not for us so much. I mean, I think that is obviously a big market, but it's.
And is there manufacturing base? What does it look like when you compare it to other places in the world you've worked and operated and sold machines? Because I think that's an interesting thing for people to hear. Yeah.
I think the interesting thing is that there are a very wealthy set of countries who understand that there is a finite timeline where they will be remaining wealthy. There will come a time when pumping the black stuff out the desert is no longer what it used to be, as the world tries to move away from fossil fuels. Now, I think that's going to take a lot longer than the net zero zealots would like to think. It will take longer, but nevertheless, they're using their wealth to try and understand how do we get into advanced manufacturing. So you'll see, and they've got some big airlines with a lot of purchasing power. So aerospace is certainly a big area. I think the medical industry in Saudi is quite a big area. The defense industry is clearly huge. You can export machines into the defense sector because they are allies, but it does take time to get the permissions. A lot of time. We even have to get approval on occasion to do cycle time studies. So we can't just do a cycle time study for a company without getting permission to do it.
Yeah. I mean, is money no object when they're purchasing?
No, there is commercially driven as any other buyer.
Right.
There are lots of us out there. Our competitors are out there, and these guys, whilst they have a lot of money, they also understand value for money, and they've got buyers who are incentivized to do the best deal that they can, like anybody else. So that they're always pushing.
I want to come back to this Minister of Manufacturing. We see a lot on social media about, if it was you given that role tomorrow, what are the things that you would change and would do to give, I guess, the SMEs and manufacturers here reassurance and new opportunities and the ability to be better businesses? What are we doing wrong?
Very simple. Okay. You do not have an industrial policy that floats like the wind, depending on who's got the keys to number 10. In the same way you should be doing with your National Health Service. You come up with a policy for 50 or 70 years. You agree that on a cross-party basis if necessary, and you all sign off on it. And you give everybody a clear understanding of the direction of travel. And then you've got people who can make investment decisions. But when you have no idea what someone's going to decide to do from one political cycle to the next, we had the super deduction tax incentive a few years ago to try and boost people buying machine tools, and the next lot take it away because they felt they weren't getting the revenue. There is no consistency in an industrial policy. We don't have an industrial policy. That's why you have this ridiculous thing of putting Rolls-Royce through the ringer to try and compete on SMRs. If there is an industrial strategy that says, no, we want to protect our steel manufacturing. We want to protect our power generation. We want to make sure that we are masters of our own destiny in those areas. Let's put an industrial policy in place that says those are the guidelines, those are the rules. Then everybody can invest accordingly. But it's not knowing what the next guy is going to do that makes it difficult.
And that does seem obvious, Richard, and I totally agree. I totally agree with you. And when you look down the supply chain and you look at where we sit as a nation with our automation investment and where we are on that, we're so behind the curve. But why would, the pain points for a manufacturer are typically that, I can't get those longer contracts, so I'm not reassured enough to invest.
I'm not sure
is that a fair argument? Do you hear that? You must see.
I hear all sorts of stuff about the adversity to, or the reluctance to embrace automation, which I really don't understand. I can understand it maybe from 10 or 15 years ago, but automation now, batch sizes of one is every day.
Perhaps I framed that question incorrectly. The actual investment, whether it be automation, a machine tool or something, the fact that there's no reassurance of longer term commitments. given the type of things we
but I'm not too sure that they exist elsewhere. I would say the German Volkswagen buyer is just as ruthless as the next guy. You know, he doesn't go to some subcontractor in Germany and say, you've got 5 years, fill your boots. I don't think they exist anymore. I don't think anybody does that. But I do think there is a misunderstanding of what automation in the machine tool world can deliver. You know, I remember a very humorous story, if you like. I won't mention the company's name, but an Irish company. And they've got quite a few of our machines. And I used to go in there and see the owner, lovely chap, the guy that I have broken bread with many, many times. So I get on with him very well. And every time I go into his factory, I see these guys standing in front of the machines, no pallet changes, nothing, loading parts. I said, Eddie, I said his name, should I say that? You've really got to think about automation. He said, no, Richard, every time we go down there, the boys are working away, you know, solid.
Scottish as well, is he?
No, he's Irish. Working away, solid. And I said, okay, well, let's go down on the shop floor. I said, how old's that machine? Oh, 2018. I said, okay, so 6 years. What are you getting out of it? What's your OEE now? Oh, you know, 2 shifts, 5 days a week. We must be doing 4,500, 5,000 a year. I said, okay, great. So let's have a look on the control. And sure enough, 2018, 6 years, the machine had been on for 36,000 hours. But the spindle had been turning for about 10,000 hours. Right? I said, well, your OEE is about 25, 30%. No, it can't be. It can't be. I said, that is the situation. You have no idea. The only time you can get an OEE on a single pallet machine that is really up there is if you've got a cycle time of 10 hours. But if your cycle time is 5 or 6 minutes, the guy's going on a tea break, the guy's picking his horses for the afternoon, having a chat on his phone, doing what he's doing. You cannot get OEE without automation. Why would you invest that amount of money in a machine that's only working for you 30 or 40% of the time? It makes no sense. Yeah, but the cost of automation is so high and I don't get batch sizes like that. Well, that's because you're not understanding what automation can do. You know, that is the message that we have to try and sort of educate people on. And I think the UK has been very slow. You know, if you look at Korea, I think the robot population per 100 head of capital is about 52, and the UK is about 8.
Yeah, I think we don't like change. I think there's a big thing in our culture, and I see it when I go to other countries. When I go to the US, the positive nation with a positive outlook, entrepreneurialism, you know, investment, and I think there's this kind of thing in our culture that just like, you know, I'm doing okay with what I've got today. Yeah, maybe it's inefficient, but it's pushing people to change. I've always thought that, and I don't like it, and I see it in every walk of life, and I just think it's part of our culture.
Yeah, and you know, change is difficult. With change, there's risk, isn't there? Yeah. Very easy to stick with what you know and not take that decision. But I think people will find that they're under pressure to do so. I think if you don't embrace it, you're going to find it difficult. Everybody at the moment, you know, I look at the sliding head market and the subcontract turning, and I look at what those guys are doing, and they've all got the same kit. They're really pretty much paying their people the same amount of money. The kit performs very much the same way. It's very difficult to differentiate. If you imagine you're going in there as a sales guy and you say, we've got great quality, you know, we've got latest technology from Citizen or Star or whoever it might be, you know, fantastic people. And then the guy goes in there from Star and he says, you know, we've got great quality, we've got fantastic machines, the latest things from Star, we've got great people. You are basically saying exactly the same as your competitor. And you're forcing the buyer to make a decision on one thing only, which is the bottom line. And if you are winning business based on what you do to the bottom line, it's always a race to the bottom. And you're going to get poorer as a result. So you have to shift the narrative. You have to change how you're doing things. You have to look at a different approach. And that's what we're trying to do when we talk with customers. We're trying to be that trusted advisor that understands the pain, understands how they're trying to navigate these difficult times, and give them ideas that allow them to think differently about what they're doing. That's what I think is selling, rather than a features and benefits approach.
And when you run the company, when you look at how you spend your time, are you ever critical of yourself? Do you ever think, gosh, I'm doing too much of, I shouldn't be doing that, I shouldn't be getting involved in that, and you get involved in things and then you pull out? I find that a chat. I ask that question because I find myself in that position where I, think, pull out, get back in, and I go,
Yeah, I am. Yes, I'm very critical. I know my weaknesses, and my organizational skills are poor. My attention to detail, I can be easily distracted. But I've got a very good team around me that that I know will pick up the stuff that I might leave sort of lacking. I don't think I get too involved with things that I don't want to be involved with, if I'm honest. But I do find it challenging when we're, at the same time we're trying to build a new sales team. We've changed our product portfolio dramatically. We used to be just German machine tools. Now we have got a principal that's in Insaberati in Italy. We've got one in Sweden with Modig. We have got Bost in Spain. Signing these guys, everything used to be quite easy. I fly to Stuttgart, I could go and see 3 or 4 of them in the same day. Now it's a bit more complicated. So my time is definitely harder to manage.
So do you get someone to organise that for you then?
I do, but even then, there's a change there. So my PA of, I don't know how long it was, 20 years, she retired last year. So my new PA, Lisa, is working hard and doing a bloody good job, but I think she's finding it difficult to, get all the routines right and sort of hotels that needed and the cars that are needed and all that sort of stuff. But yeah, we're getting it.
And then from a strengths perspective, then do you think people around you, if they were to look, would they go, Richard's really good at that. That's why this business is. What would you say to that?
I don't know. I guess they would think that I'm very driven and that I am very customer focused. So, I'm trying to get them to think like that, from the way we answer the phones to how proactive we are in our sales service support. That is what is the differentiator. If you do all of that very, very well and you make the customer feel that you have got their best interests at heart all the time, then that helps.
When you look at an individual, when you employ, is their desire to succeed more important than their ability almost? And when you look at the balance of...
So sales is a difficult thing. Sales, anybody who thinks selling is easy hasn't really sold. Selling is a very difficult thing to do well. I've seen a lot of poor salesmen. There's a great guy, I think he's called Brian Burns, who does this. You may have seen him. He does these sort of podcasts. And he said, you can play golf all your life and die a shit golfer. I will die a shit golfer. And it's because you don't practice enough. And it's exactly the same with sales. You can be in sales all your life and die a shit salesman. Now, you're like a broken clock. Twice a day you're going to be right, and occasionally you're going to get an order. But a great salesman, they are rare. They're as rare as rocking horse shit, I think, in our world. Long sales cycle, developing relationships where you've got to keep the guy interested or the girl interested and focused and keen to hear what you say next. That's a skill, and you have to work at it. You have to really look at educating the people to do that well. It's not a natural thing. It's almost counterintuitive. You have to work on the idea of equal business standing. You have to be able to say to a customer, actually, I don't think this is right for us. I don't think we are the right person for you. And you've got to have enough confidence to be able to say that. That's not what you're taught. You're taught, get the bloody quote in. Somebody else will make that decision.
I think that's a really interesting point, because I think that comes with success. I think it's much easier once you have been successful or are successful in winning business, adding value to customers, and you've got a good reputation. It's very easy at that point, or easier, to go into a situation where you feel it's not quite right and say, I don't think this is quite right, because you almost have the freedom to do that. And I think sometimes if you haven't had a successful period and sales are tough and inquiries, it's more difficult, because
sure it is.
That's when you really need.
Yeah.
And I remember when I first started working for a machine tool business, and I remember spending, and it was known that 3 months, if you hadn't sold something within 3 months, it's getting a bit problematic. You potentially, your job's on the line, and that's the sort of timescales we were talking. And there are businesses like that. I'm not suggesting for a minute yours.
I absolutely do not agree with that.
No,
I have seen sales guys I myself, when I joined the company in 88, I didn't sell. It was a tough time. 89, 90, the world was, you're probably too young to remember, but it was a pretty tough time. And I didn't sell a bean. Nobody even taught me how to sell. I didn't know what I was doing. So this idea that you can get an order within 3 months, absolute nonsense. I don't believe it. And if there are people out there that are driving to that cycle, then they don't understand the business either.
And I think I think I agree. And I don't think that's so much the case these days, but going back 20 years ago, it was very much the case. And I think there was an opportunity to replace sales guys far easier. I think there was a lot more machine tool sales guys at that time out there that could come in and do the job, or at least try. But I just remember having that 3-month period, and every call I made and every place I went, it just seemed to become more and more difficult. And I remember a colleague I spoke to at the time, and he said, what are you doing from day to day? And I said, well, I'm doing more today than I did yesterday. And he said, well, are you doing the same thing? Well, much of the same is going to get you much of the same result. And it was about changing maybe the pattern of activity. And in fact, I did. I just completely, I thought, right, well, I'm not going to go and make 10 calls in the car today. Actually, I'm just going to sit on the phone and do something different and try a different approach. Sure enough, within that 3-month window, I'd sold a machine. But that machine I sold was a really tough sale, and I compromised slightly on my margins, and I gave a bit more away than I should. But what that enabled me to do was build a bit of confidence. So I went into the next one thinking, well, I've got that one behind me. It's like a striker scoring goals, isn't it?
Yeah.
And that's why I suppose I come back to the point that I think once you do become successful, it's much easier to get yourself in a position where you can just go, no, I'm not taking that business. That's not right for you, and that's not right for me.
I hear what you're saying, Paul, but I would be encouraging my guys to say, don't worry. Don't worry. I am not looking over your shoulder. I'm not expecting miracles in 3 months. You've got time. You've got time. As long as I can see you working hard. The guy that helps us with the training is a fantastic chap. And he sort of says to the guys, when you're sitting there and you're just about to go into the call, and you're sitting there in your car and you're ready to go in and you've thought about the meeting and you know what you're going to be doing, you planned it, just say to yourself, I'd like your business, but I don't need your business. Say that to yourself a couple of times before you go in. I'd like your business, but I don't need your business. You want to have that air of equal business standing. Your time is important. His time is important. You don't go in there and say, thank you for the meeting and all that, because you sound like a sniffy salesman. That's what salesmen say. You are there because this guy's got a pain. This guy's trying to do something. Whatever it is, your job is to find out what and why, and then to work out whether you can help him. And be honest if you can't. And that's what we're trying to achieve.
The next, what have we got in front of us now? 8-9 months till the end of the year, 7-8 months. What's it going to look like, do you think? I mean, obviously the new NI costs have come in. I heard on the radio this morning that employment figures down are decreased. You're going to see an impact on that. So, potentially so are we. What's the community out there within manufacturing going to look like, do you think, what's the landscape?
Yeah, it is difficult. As a group, we're quite a large group now. I think this NI change costs us 350,000 quid. The 350,000 quid comes off the bottom line as a result of the NI change, because we have a timber business. And so
is that a good decision or a bad decision?
An appalling decision. Absolutely appalling. 25 billion taking out of business at a time when you're trying to get inflation under control. It's inevitable. I mean, businesses don't pay tax. Realistically, businesses don't pay tax. People pay tax. You tax business, and business will have to find a way of passing that on. So it becomes inflationary. You've got the minimum wage going up. That's inflationary. So you have all of these inflationary pressures being introduced into the economy at a time when we really like interest rates to come down so that people can afford their mortgages more. Andrew Bailey and the governors, they talk about a downward trajectory. I think that's absolute nonsense. I think the world is probably going to see interest rates going back up again at a time when nobody needs that to happen. I may be wrong, but the Bank of England normally get it wrong, don't they? Whatever they say, it goes the other way. And I think this change into national insurance contributions is going to be very damaging to the country over time. Personally, I think I'm optimistic for the business because there are sectors that are very strong. The defense obviously being one of them. And we have a lot that's relevant to that sector. So we are busy. But I can see the run-of-the-mill subcontractor who's got a diverse portfolio selling into the hydraulics industry or whatever it might be, finding it much more difficult. So it is a worry.
Richard, it's been a real pleasure today. I've really enjoyed it.
Oh, that was quick. It's flown by.
It has flown by. I think we're probably on, maybe the best part of an hour. But
you're kidding.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thoroughly enjoyable exercise. We should do this again.
All right.
When the outcome of some of these things we've discussed today is clearer to see.
Okay, great. Well, thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you.